Thanks for having me, Brian. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Touchton. I'm with Florida Keys Appraisal Company. I've been appraising real estate in Key Largo and Key West since the year 2000. During this time, I've had the opportunity to appraise many different types of commercial real estate in Southeast Florida and from Key Largo to Key West and north of here in the United States as well. Thank you to all the realtors for the many great referrals over the years. I want to send out a special thanks to Mr. Brian Schmidt for his many referrals and support over these many years. One thing that I want to qualify before I get started is that this is not an appraisal course per se, and I am not an appraisal instructor. There's certain state licensing that's necessary for that. Can anybody hear me okay? Okay. Today we're merely going to talk about how appraisers perform the process of valuing commercial real estate. The primary objective of today's discussion will identify different types of commercial property, highlight the difference between going concern and commercial real estate, touch on what lenders require in a commercial appraisal, summarize appraising the real estate, and we're going to talk about how realtors and the appraiser communicate to exchange data. And when we get done, we can have a question and answer session. Okay, different types of commercial real estate. We want to make a note that commercial real estate is considered income producing property. This is important because further on we'll discuss the lender's perspective on business and real estate income. Examples of commercial real estate include freestanding retail or offices, multi-tenant retail or offices, that would be strip centers, shopping centers, and office complexes, multi-tenant residential properties, as you know, mostly apartments in this respect. Restaurants, marinas, and hotels, and industrial properties. For this discussion, we're going to use a single-tenant, freestanding commercial building that in many cases house what we enduringly refer to as the mom-and-pop business. Okay, as you can see, we've got an example there. That's a 10,000 square foot marine supply store. You can see the mountains in the background, so it's probably not in the Florida Keys. The business owners, a husband and wife team, have operated a successful marine supply store here for several years. They decide to sell the property and parlay their equity to a rural property in North Florida. Their goal is to sell the real estate and the business in one package. A realtor lists the property and takes an offer after 50 days on the market. The buyer seeks financing, and his or her lender requires an appraisal to use the property as collateral in a loan. The lender hires a commercial appraiser to provide an opinion of the market value. Along with other information, the seller submits a profit and loss statement for the business. Within the profit and loss statement is the annual business income and expenses for both the business and the real estate. Therefore, we need to go on a little side journey here. Although we're not here to discuss the nuances of commercial lending, it is important to touch on the lender's perspective as it relates to the business and the real estate income. I would point out that lenders in most cases are not concerned with intangible assets when collateralizing a loan on commercial real estate. That's the business. You might ask, why is this? Okay, well, the key word here is intangible business assets or income. Excuse me. Okay, the performance of a business can change overnight from one operator to another. Although a business can benefit from its location, this is primarily a function of the real estate. It should be noted that a key factor for the success of any business is management expertise, which can differ vastly when businesses change hands. If a business is purchased with the real estate and the business fails, the only tangible collateral the lender has is the real estate. Thus, an appraisal assignment for an owner-occupied, single-tenant commercial property requires the appraiser to estimate a market rent for only the real estate with little regard for the business income. The appraiser may consider current or past business performance, which may help in determining the highest and best use or the most likely user of the property. But in the end, it is the income from the current or potential rents that creates value to the commercial real estate in an appraisal. Does anybody have any questions on that? I guess we're communicating it okay so far then. Yes, ma'am.
So if you have an appraisal for the bank and possibly giving you more money. So,
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite.
So you've got a property, a business that's being appraised
Yes, ma'am.
to get a loan on that property. So
Right.
it's not based on a sale.
Well, we're going to get to that point. Yeah, I'm trying to present here some of the things that we need to communicate on in terms of what the operating statement that the seller may, submit. Okay, but yeah, we're going to get to the point where we do use sales. That's a definite. I'm not going to expand on that too much in this discussion because we also use the sales comparison approach and the cost approach for residential appraisals. So what we want to try to concentrate on today is the income capitalization approach. But yes, I do definitely take into consideration sales of the property. Okay, appraising the commercial real estate. Appraisers are bound by the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice, which includes the following steps. Did I click that yet? Sorry. Okay. Okay, defining the appraisal problem. Identifying the appraisal problem allows the appraiser to make a determination as to the scope of work necessary to achieve credible assignment results. The appraiser will conduct an initial interview with the client in order to obtain critical information. The appraiser will identify the client and the owner of the property. In the case of our example, the client is the lender. The borrower is not the client. We're going to identify all intended users. In this example, the lender is the client as well as the intended user. The borrower is not the intended user of the report. This gets into some confusion, I know, because ultimately the borrower pays for the appraisal, so they want to know why the appraiser can't communicate directly with them. But there's a confidentiality provision in USPAP where the appraiser can only communicate with the client. In this case, it's the lender. Okay, we want to identify the intended use of the appraisal. In this case here, the intended use is for a loan. We're going to identify the effective date of the appraisal. Why do we identify the effective date? Anybody know? Anybody got an idea? Markets can change rapidly, and the appraisal presents a snapshot as of a certain point in time. A property could be worth $500,000 today and $600,000 tomorrow or $400,000 tomorrow. It just depends when that big asteroid's going to hit out there in the Gulf of Mexico. We're going to identify the property interest to be valued. Okay, that's fee simple interest, leased fee interest, or leasehold interest. Okay. Okay, the sales comparison approach is relevant. That was your question earlier. But we're going to skip over it here because our goal is to illustrate evaluation via the income capitalization approach. How do we value the subject via the income capitalization approach? The income capitalization approach determines the value of a property using the relationship between the income and value. Okay? There's other. Have we got that up there? Okay. Okay. So we want to note that our subject building is not leased, but the appraiser estimates a market rent and envisions a lease type for the purposes of valuing the real estate in the income capitalization approach. Okay, let's look at some lease types. Okay, there are three primary lease types. You got the triple net lease, the gross lease, and the modified gross lease. Okay, under triple net leases, all the expenses for the operation of the real estate are passed through to the tenant, either by passing the actual bills to the tenant or charging a common area maintenance rent. That's CAM, common area maintenance, CAM. The CAM rent is for the real estate taxes, the insurance premiums, and repairs and maintenance of the improvements, and that can be the site improvements and the building improvements. Okay, a gross lease. Under gross leases, the landlord pays for all the expenses for the operation of the real estate. That's why a gross lease is typically, the rental rate for a gross lease is typically higher than the base rent for a triple net lease. A lot of times what I find is people will report the triple net base rent and the CAM together, and they're calling it a triple net lease. Well, yeah, by definition it's a triple net lease because there's the triple net base and the CAM, but when you add the two together, you actually have the gross lease. Okay? Okay, we got the modified gross lease. Okay, under this lease type, the landlord may pass through either the insurance premium or the real estate taxes. Okay, the tenant typically pays for its liability insurance, maintenance, and utilities. Okay, for our example subject, we have envisioned a triple net lease. Okay, this way any non-typical expenses or questionable expense amounts in the profit and loss statement provided by the seller are eliminated. Any questions there? You kind of get that. What happens is that once you estimate a triple net rent, then you're going to estimate the expenses triple net. So a lot of times, you know, you got, and we're going to look at an example profit and loss statement moving forward here. But you're going to have some things in there that are like, well, I need to make a phone call and ask a question about these. When you estimate a triple net rent, all that goes away because all of those some of those gross expenses go away as well. Okay, so analysis of the comparable rentals. Okay, we're going to apply a comparative analysis of the market rentals, kind of the same way that we would do in the in the sales comparison approach. It's a comparative analysis. Okay. Now, the rent comps may come from prior appraisals, the MLS, or other media. The appraiser may interview realtors to obtain the rents and lease terms from sales and rental listings. Okay, this is where we can, again, communicate. Okay, the rental rates for retail buildings are expressed in dollars per square foot for comparison purposes. Okay. The reported monthly rents are converted to dollar per square foot values via the following formula. You got rent per month times 12 months divided by building square footage equals your rental rate. That's rent per square foot. Basically, your annual rent divided by your building square footage equals your rental rate. This is used to analyze property to property within this particular approach. Okay, as you can see, that's a grid, one of the typical grids that I would use in a report. Okay, we've got the subject and all of its data in the one column, and then we have the 5 rental comps to the right of that. And so we come up with, at the bottom of the line, we've got, excuse me, at the bottom of the grid, we've got 2 rows. One is the unadjusted rental rates, okay? And you'll notice that 2 of the comps are triple net rents, and 3 of the comps are modified gross and gross rents, okay? So if we're going to trade apples for apples, we have to adjust everything to triple net since we're estimating a triple net rent for the subject property. That would be the bottom line, which is the light blue shading. Okay, after adjustment, the triple net rental rates range from $11.94 to $16.28 per square foot. Based on the most similar rentals, a rental rate of $12 per square foot is estimated for our example subject. We're going to apply the rental rate to the building square feet to estimate the potential gross income. Okay, so you got 10,000 square feet times $12 a square foot equals $120,000. Next, we're going to deduct vacancy and collection loss to estimate effective gross income. Okay, so based on the market analysis, we have estimated a V&C loss of 5% of the potential gross income and deduct it to indicate the effective gross income. So you can see the table up there. We've got the potential gross income less the V&C, $6,000 equals effective gross income of $114,000. Okay, next we're going to estimate the operating expenses and deduct them to arrive at the net operating income. That's the NOI. Any questions so far? Not fallen asleep yet? Okay, let's take a look at our example operating statement. Okay, so what we typically do is we will reconstruct the P&L that's been submitted to us for the appraisal report. Okay, in this particular case, what we've done is input the data from the subject property's profit and loss statement in the middle column, and then we have estimated the expenses for just the real estate based on a triple net lease. Okay, so insurance. Let's look at the expenses. Insurance, okay? They show insurance of $20,183. Well, under triple net, that's a pass-through item to the tenant. So we don't estimate insurance, okay? Auto expense. Well, that's a business expense, not a real estate expense, so that's not applicable. Maintenance and repairs, that again is a pass-through item under triple net. Real estate taxes, pass-through under triple net. Travel, that's a business expense, not applicable. Electricity and water, both of those are utilities. Tenant pays for those, pass through under triple net. Security, dog food and vet fees, not applicable. Okay, in the case of a triple net lease, the above expenses are typically limited to a management fee and an allowance for replacement reserve of short-lived building items, okay? A management fee typical of similar properties is estimated at 5% of the effective gross income for the subject property, okay? So you got $114,000 EGI times 5% equals $5,700. For the example subject, the replacement reserve allowance is estimated for short-lived building items such as air conditioning units, exterior painting, and parking lot resealing and striping. The aggregate of the reserve line item is $7,500. You can see that we've input those in our estimated expense column at management and replacement reserves. Thus, the total operating expenses in this particular case are $13,200. We're then going to input the data into a one-year income and expense pro forma. So basically, this is a summarization of all of the estimation of the PGI, the vacancy and collection loss, deduction of the expenses, to indicate a net operating income to the real estate. That's $100,800 in this particular case. The next step in the income capitalization approach is to determine an overall capitalization rate applicable to the subject. I'm going to reiterate that, applicable to the subject, because capitalization rates can change from one property to another based upon the type of property it is and what certain risk factors are associated with that property. So, capitalization rate applicable to the subject property. Although there are many methodologies that can be applied to form a cap rate, they are all related to the basic formula: income divided by value equals rate. Okay, so in this particular case, this is income, NOI, divided by sales price equals overall capitalization rate. Using the formula, the appraiser extracts cap rates from sales of similar properties. Okay, you're going to see that in that grid right there. I've blocked out the property addresses in order to protect the innocent here. So basically, you've got the column with the sale amounts, the NOIs, and the overall capitalization rates in the right-hand column. So you got NOI divided by cap rate, divided by sales price equals overall cap rate. You'll also note that we inserted a column for the year of the sale, and this is important because it helps us to establish a trend in cap rates over time. Cap rates from 5 years ago may obviously not be applicable to a property today. The sales extractions set a range of cap rates, and the appraiser selects a viable rate based on the market dynamics and perceived risk factors associated with the subject property. Okay? For the example subject, an overall rate of 7% is concluded as reasonable. We want to make a note here that most of the NOIs in the table are from properties that we appraised, so we knew what they were by examination of the operating statements that had been submitted to us. In the cases where a cap rate is being extracted from a sale in the MLS, the appraiser would seek to verify the NOI with a realtor or other parties of the sale. This is where the operating statement that may be submitted to you can be very helpful both to the appraiser and to a potential buyer. My experience is that prudent investors want to know how they're going to capitalize their purchases. All right, here we are, last page. Then we apply the selected cap rate to estimate a market value. Okay, here the cap rate formula is inverted. In other words, if income over value equals rate, then income over rate equals value. So that's income, that's NOI divided by cap rate equals value. This is a direct capitalization pro forma table that we typically put in the report. You've got your net operating income. That's on your top row. Net operating income divided by the most probable cap rate, 7%, equals $1,440,000. The appraiser rounds the value in this example to the nearest $50,000 increment. So the indicated value being the income approach, $1,450,000. That's it. We're at the end. You just valued a property via the income approach. So I'd like to give you the opportunity now. I'm sure there must be some questions out there. Yes, sir.
Michael, do you perform limited use appraisals, and are you finding lenders will accept them?
Yeah, well, what's happened? Can you hear me okay? Or do I need to get back? Okay. Well, you don't really have a limited use appraisal anymore, okay? All appraisals are performed they came out, they got rid of that several years ago. So all appraisals are performed based upon the scope of work agreed upon between the client and the appraiser. And usually, a lot of times in that initial interview, they'll be able to decide what valuation is necessary for a particular subject. We do have two different types of reports now, though. We have the appraisal report, which falls under Standards Rule 2-2A, okay? And we have the restricted appraisal report, which is a much more condensed version. And I think in terms of your question, what happens is for lesser valuations or valuations that are meant for one single intended user, you're going to use the restricted appraisal report, and that's because that particular intended user already has sufficient knowledge of the subject property as well as their market area. So you don't have to communicate all of the other, market analyses and so forth. You have to do the work, but you don't have to communicate the whole thing in the report. So you're talking about shaving out anywhere from 20 to 40 pages, from what would be a typical 2-2A appraisal report. But limited use, that's gone. They used to do that, they don't do it anymore. Yes, sir.
Obviously, if you have a vacant building, you'll just do a pro forma for the rents, and still give an income.
Well, I've got to go out and analyze the rents.
You'll
I
still
mean,
give an income approach, right?
on a limited, you mean on a restrict?
On a vacant building, on a vacant.
Yeah, what you have to do there is you've got to, unfortunately, build an imaginary situation, but it's one that has its base, because what you're going to do is say, well, we've got a vacant building here, okay? So what would be a viable rental rate for that building? Okay, now how long is it going to take us to rent that building up? But we still need to be able to analyze it from that perspective. Now, a lot of times if you came to me and said, hey, Mike, I've got a listing and we just want to know what to list this property for. Okay, well, see, you and I can discuss that. That's your client, that's your initial client appraiser interview, and we can decide upon a scope of work. I don't necessarily have to do an income approach on that. You can say, look, we just want you to appraise it based on what the sales are. The point I'm getting in this discussion is typically a lender is going to require us to perform an income capitalization approach, because they want to know how that thing's going to cash flow, because if they get stuck holding the bag, I mean, that building's got to be rented to cover the cost, mortgage payments and so forth, until such time that they can liquidate the property. Does that answer your question? Okay, maybe it was too much. I'm sorry. Anything else? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
So when you come up with a cap rate, a percentage that's a profitability percentage number as
Yes.
the appraiser.
Yes.
When you wind up with that whatever it is, how does that affect your calculating the value of the property?
Okay. You're going to use your net operating income that you've estimated by way of estimating the rents and then extrapolating to get down to the net operating income. Okay?
No, I know how it's found.
Okay,
but
okay.
how do
Now we're going to get to the cap rate. So now what you're going to do is you're going to divide the NOI by the cap rate. Okay? In other words, 100,000 divided by 0.07 is going to equal your value. Okay?
Okay.
So that's the ratio.
Reverse
Because you see what happens is in forming a cap rate, you're going to divide the net operating income by the sales price. So then what happens is, like I was saying, you invert the formula and you're going to divide the NOI by the rate in order to equal your value. Does that answer your
Yes,
question?
thank you.
Okay.
I got a question about it.
Yes, sir.
You see properties advertised on the internet and so on by commercial lenders or sellers. They will advertise such a building, so many square feet located somewhere, and they'll say cap rate 6.8. So that's all an imaginary number. Right?
Not necessarily, okay? But I thought about that, and I had that in there, but I didn't want to go too far off onto a sojourn because, you know, we had some time constraints. But I see it all the time. And I'll tell you who's really good at that is Will Langley down there at Berkshire. I know that's your competition. I know that's your competition, but you know what? You should follow that. You should follow that protocol. I'm going to tell you right now. Sorry, Brian. Here's what you have to be careful of, though. Okay, when you're saying we got X amount of square feet and the property's this and it's that, and you're marketing it, and you say, okay, it's going to be a cap rate of 7%. Well, you got to be careful there because that goes back to the profit and loss statement. Okay. That can be skewed one way or another. That's why, you know, if you're going to advertise it at a certain cap rate, what you need to do is take a look at their P&L statement, okay? And all of those expenses that are not associated with the real estate, dog food, you need to get those out of there, okay? So that the expenses that you have, the total expenses, once, you know, subtracted from the revenues is going to give you a viable net operating income. And then you're going to look at the way you're going to get to your cap rate is you're going to say, you know, you're going to divide that NOI that you've got into the listing price. So that's your marketing cap rate. You're marketing it at 6.8%, but you don't want to get convoluted with expenses in the P&L statement that, you know, are not associated to the real estate.
Yeah, so my point is, if you see this ad, your broker's advertising.
That's not wrong. Maybe maybe they know what they're doing. I give them the credit for that. You know, here's the thing. I'm going to give you an example. A lot of times, you know, I try to call people when I see, obviously, almost every sale that, you know, I'm using as a comp. I try to call the realtors or the seller or the buyer or the title agent or somebody to try to get to the mechanics of the sale, because obviously the public record, you know, that's just a generalization, okay? I don't want to get too far off on a tangent there. But in any case, that particular cap rate should be based on the NOI to the real estate, and it can get convoluted. So that's the reason I went through that exercise about how to get to the NOI using an example profit and loss statement. We all right with that? Are you still?
Oh, no. It's not me per se.
Yeah,
I know a person who does invest.
right.
You'll see the ad for the thing, and he says,
Yeah.
well, I'm not going to put my money in anything under 7%.
Sure.
But he has no idea if that's 7%.
But you know what? See, that's something that you can do. I mean, I'm not going to tell you how to run your business, you know, but that's something that you can do for your client, is to say, okay, well, let me find you some properties that match up with what your investment criteria is. And you're going to go out there and get these profit and loss statements from whatever potential listings there are. and then go through the process and come up with an NOI and then say, well, here's what they're listing the property for. So using the equation, here's what the cap rate is based on the NOI versus the listing price. And if it, there again, like a lot of times what I'll do is I see something that has a listing price of such and such, and it's advertised at a certain cap rate. Well, then I'll just go backwards and say, well, if you take that listing price and you apply that cap rate, now I can come up with the net operating income. Then I go back and look what the property actually closed for. And it's different from the listing price, but yet I have the NOI from the equation, so now I can calculate the true cap rate.
All right.
Mike, I just wanted to ask you about it, because you're referring to this exercise you went through, the property where the owner is...
Yeah, that's just an example property.
But what I want to ask to be sure of, so if you have an owner that is not the operator, but has a triple net lease on his property to a tenant,
Sure.
and he wants to sell that unit,
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to get the
That makes it real easy for me. I love that.
triple net lease direct to him, and there's...
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're still going to analyze to see if the lease is at market rates, because let's say that you have...
But you don't have to do the NOI nonsense
Oh, I still have to go through there.
for the tenant.
Yeah, I still... Because, see, well, it depends how the lease is written, okay? You could have what's called an absolute net lease, okay? And under that particular situation, your management expense and everything is included in the CAM, okay? So basically, there's no expense to the property owner. So in your case there, the triple net rent is the NOI, absolutely. But you still need to analyze it. Okay? I'm sorry?
What is it? What's the key?
CAM,
What'd you say? Yeah.
CAM, common area maintenance, okay? Common area maintenance. That typically is your real estate, tax expense, your repairs and maintenance, and your insurance premiums. Sir?
You see many properties, investment properties in the Keys that transfer that have a cap rate above about 6.5 or 7.5%.
Well, the question for a lot of years, whenever I would call and ask somebody for a cap rate, the joke was, what's a cap rate in the Keys? Because nobody really cared, I mean, a lot of these owner-occupied properties, they really don't care what the cap rate is because they're looking for something to plop their business down in, and it really doesn't matter. But for appraisals that are done, for lenders, we have to go through the exercise, okay? And what you're seeing, I remember when I first started appraising commercial properties in New Smyrna Beach, the joke was, don't worry about it, the cap rate's 10%, it's always 10%, And that was basically for many years investors' criteria when they approach these things. We want to try to get at least 10% on our purchase. That's return on and of monies that are invested. What you're seeing over time, though, as values, especially in the state of Florida, have continued to rise, they've risen faster than the rental rates have. So what's happened is that's driven down cap rates. And it used to be you capitalized a property at 6%, you're getting a call from that loan reviewer. I don't like phone calls. Nobody, because now I've got to answer a bunch more questions and I'm trying to make some money over here on this other appraisal. But in any case, now it's not uncommon. 6 to 7% is, highly supported.
I've seen
Yeah,
the Keys when I look around.
yeah, especially in the Florida Keys. Absolutely.
Hey, Mike, I have a question. What's the time frame from like when you get the call to do the appraisal to when you finish it?
Well, there again, that depends upon the complexity of the property.
Like the one-
I
the
mean,
example
so
we
this
just
property
did.
here, theoretically, I can kick that out in 5 days. But I always allow longer because I was in development for a lot of years, and Murphy's Law is always in effect. What can go wrong will go wrong, and so you've got to try to schedule yourself so that, and not only that, in my case, I may have 5 or 6 other appraisals going, so I'll get to a certain point, and I'll be waiting for information to come in on that one, and so I'll lateral over to the other appraisal and kind of push that thing along. It's just, kind of a management and coordination thing. So I would typically, in my contract with you on a property like that, allow maybe 10 to 12 days. But if you called me and said, Mike, I got to have this thing in 5 days, I'm going to say, okay, well, the fee was $1,500, but for you it's $1,750 to do it in 5 days. Yeah, I'm kind of running past. Thank you very much. Thank you for such a great reception.